so nobody from outside can hack the data. Yeah, and that's an important thing. I'm not sure it can be applied to stuff Bart is working on, because he's thinking from a more global perspective, where all data first have to be brought together in one way or the other. But I think I finally understand what you're talking about, because I'm absolutely not into technology from this part of research. And I looked up some website to explain in a very childish way to me what blockchain all is about.
But
maybe
it is a wide range, so it catches a little from everywhere.
Yeah,
we cannot make a proposition that will gather all the information in that.
Yeah,
so we need to space it up.
I have in kind of a direction for proposition. I think what you said as well, Alexandru, that the metaverse is already everywhere. But what is actually happening with digitization is that we are creating a duplication of our world in a digital form. And these worlds are very similar depending on the region, because we all have different cultures and morals and values. So there is no monolithic view on this. There never will be a monolithic. If that would be the truth, we would not have wars. We can't solve the problem of fighting each other. So that's what war is all about. It's about defending ideologies and values in that sense. Yeah. But one of these proposals is that we need digital human rights. And for example, in Article 3 of our European Fundamental Rights is written that you cannot use the body or parts of the body for economical purposes. So nobody can sell their organs. So we could say, like, in a digital world, can somebody sell the data which are extractions out of our body? Can that be even an economical value in that sense? And I think what we need to propose is kind of a charter of digital human rights to replicate that and create a framework that reflects on these duplications. What are the rights in a duplicated world in that metaverse? And perhaps that's something we could work on, but that's my suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah. Bart, thank you very much. So I can absolutely underline that as we are facing a similar change in our environment and things we are working with since the early beginnings of the industrializations, when we moved from agriculture culture to industrialized culture. So this is the next step. And as the people back then, we are trying to find our way to cope with the new technology, and because we don't know what can it bring, what is what are the features. This is so difficult because we are at the same time. So it's my understanding, we are trying to figure out what it is useful and how does it work.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it, what is the best way to use it? Because right now we are planting some seeds that we really don't know what will come out of it. So that's the main concern. I think we should prioritize, because if the seeds go wrong, the plantation goes wrong, we may face bad decision along the way.
Mm.
Yep.
I think it is a good idea to start with some of the questions of the chat, and I would, if you are okay with it, start with the first one, because trust is something I'm deeply interested in. If you are all okay with it, have you all opened the chat so you can see the questions?
Yes.
Yes. My first idea to these questions is some questions from the chat now and how machines can help us build cultures of trust. My first notion to this would be that there can be no culture of trust without clear concepts of what trust is, how trust can be handled. From a systemic perspective, trust works paradoxically, as I said in my panel introduction, which means that the moment we talk about trust, we have a problem on our hand. It is the same with machines, and all of you tech guys here, Bart, Julian, and Alexandro know this. The moment people are starting to mistrust AI and robotics, we are in a field where we have to explain, and there can always come more questions from the direction of mistrust. I think we should create a dialogue from the meta perspective on trust in order to understand how the dialogue on trust can be used for society to better understand what AI and robotics can do for us. Can you go with me here? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Yeah.
I think we also, next to a framework of trust, I think I differentiate in AI that I don't talk about trustworthy AI, I talk about reliable and reliance. And that can be through methods you can kind of test AI models on their reliability in that sense. But it's, for me, still not something I would trust. It's like you buy a car, you don't trust your car, you are relying on your car. And I think that is a different like way of looking at the trust aspect, because we don't do that with cars. You don't trust your car, you trust the company or the organization that builds the car in that sense to say that this car is reliable, and then you trust the TÜV in Germany that tests the quality of these things. So you have these kind of institutions that then test that reliability.
I think that's a good idea to use the word reliability here. Also in organization design, right? The moment we start talking about trust, we mistrust our colleagues. But the moment we are asking the question, how, in which topics and work areas can you rely on your colleagues, you have a completely other discussion on your hand. There's this other question I really like. How can we bring the use and increased awareness of AI algorithms mining our data for commercial purposes, etc., into education? Do you agree with me here, guys, that there will be that it will be a little bit less difficult if our children learn to code?
Yeah, here I think in our way of dealing with this kind of things, we have already proposed to some universities in Romania that we can bring IE into programming. So, in my opinion, as a programmer, since I was a kid, I think the programming languages must turn into something that already OpenAI gave access us to it. So I think it's the most convenient and the most best way of learning the kid to use some IE programming software. Then each one can and will learn as like an experienced user to use the programming languages that are already changing day by day. So I think IE can do the best in this area of technology. IE can bring what we are writing into different programming language, and I think is the best way to get the kids into the next steps of programming languages. So I think AI can do the best in this area. When a kid can understand how to communicate with the software, he can tell the software what he wants to build. And from there, the software can decide by its AI which is the best way to go into what type of programming language, what is the machine that we'll use, and so on. So in my opinion, and in what we do, I think it's the most important thing in our web. So
thank you, Bart and Julian and sorry, Rebecca.
Yeah, I would actually like to ask a question directly connecting to your question and Alexandro's comment, but I can wait.
No, I just wanted to read another question from the chat. So,
Rebecca, just,
okay.
The question that you picked out, just a simple line like of feedback, because it was more like, how can we create awareness that this data is being used for commercial purposes? That was the question. The question that I would ask, do really people care? Because we know the discussion on WhatsApp versus Signal or Telegram, or we see how people don't care about sharing their data that is used for commercial purposes. I think that is and so you need to start them educating on many different other concepts that have nothing to do with the commercial use. So this goes really beyond that single question. Because you need to understand why open knowledge is important. You need to understand the history of the Enlightenment. You need to understand so many different elements that I think a lot of people are missing to be able to answer that question.
May I directly jump in here from the user perspective? I would say, if I look to myself, I'm an educated amateur in understanding how data is used. Yes, so I am quite aware about it's exploited, etc. And I have tried in my own single environment to protect myself. So using, for example, encrypted mobile phones, using Tor browsers and whatever. And it makes your life super, super difficult. So to a moment where you cannot participate anymore in what society is today. And it actually led me to the other side that I said, you know what, I will now work freely with my data, make it accessible to all companies out there. So to Apple, Microsoft, Google, whoever, to distribute equally. But it has raised me with, or left me with the question, how can I actually influence the level of law setting? How can I influence the structure? Because I believe if I just change my ways, actually those companies don't care at all. So I need to find a means how to influence actually our legislation. And that would be my question. How can a normal person like me make sure that, or try to make their point or part in legislation giving as well, apart from what I'm currently doing, which is actually supporting NGOs on that matter, yeah, to have my voice in that as well. What could we do?
To whom do you address this question? To the
all
audience
of us.
Or to all?
To all of us, because I believe we need common or collective intelligence.
Comment on this, and then it's directing in the same direction. As I want to raise the question, the one thing is the private data, and the other thing is the artificial intelligence. And I'm not completely sure if we all have the same understanding what AI is. So we have people here which are much more in tech experienced and have another understanding of AI than people which are and don't have to so much deep in AI knowledge. So when we are talking about AI and what does it brings us, what is the benefit of it? I think it's important to be able to build up trust is to know what it means. So, and we are at the moment to what my appreciation is, we are building this this term. So, and it's this term is at the moment, collecting things together, and private data is one of them. So is private data needed for AI, and how is it connected? So I want to direct the discussion a bit in the field of definition. What is meant? So I'm completely with you, Rebecca. I want to have my private own data where I am the master of my data. So if I have a transaction, if I buy something at Amazon, I say, okay, you can have this data for 10 minutes and then I withdraw them. Yeah. You don't store them at your servers. It's just for having the transaction. And how is it in real life? It's exactly like that. You are going to some merchant on the street. You have a negotiation. You make the deal, and you have separate ways. It's not online. It's not just. It's online, completely different. And that's what annoyed me.
And Robert, I want to also not scare you, but like you said, like you give your data for a transaction, and every machine learning algorithm will learn from your data with that transaction. And there are methods to even create what we call inferred data out of your data that is not personal anymore, but has the same statistical relationships as your personal data. So you can still say, I want my data back, but the insights of the data relations is already embedded within the weights and the biases of that algorithm.
I don't want it to be too much tech, because I don't give away my personal data. I give away just the key, which is then compared on the blockchain if I am Robert Fuhrmann. And if the key is right, yes, I am, then the trust is there between the machines that the transaction is done.
Right.
I would like to refer a little bit to what Rebecca asked here, and I think it's a very important question as well as defining what AI is. The problem here is when data safety was communicated, and the new German law on data security went online, to say it so, we could see something very interesting happening there. Prior to the new law, many big corporations did not know when they break the law and when not. So advertising was less than after the new law was published and released. And that is something very interesting. Bart, maybe you can say something more about this, and Alexandro, because now I'm overwhelmed by advertisement, and as someone who is not interested in clicking every cookie. So what can we do here?
But I can answer this, and I want to answer you, Gita, and also Robert, because in our opinion, I want to provide an example. We have a domain, let's say str.gita, and another domain str.robert. Gita is selling a product to Robert. It's normal that there must be a trustful connection between them. But this is the definition on all blockchains. But we are seeing the things in the next step. Robert can communicate with Gita, having the functions and the trust built by itself, the blockchain, and can Robert send the payments and all to Gita, also with the address where she must send the product and so on, without disclaiming any of his information. Why? Because the identity is guaranteed and encrypted by plus 256 bytes. But after the transaction will end, no one will store Robert's data. Why? Because Robert's data is the file in his own phone. We are a little different, and I am including also Bart because we are based on a different node technology than the other blockchains. So now you can turn your phone into a part of the new web and also as an IoT device. But we are also including IE and the metadata that Bart was giving as an example. But the data will be only distributed with full anonymity and only as, let's say, as numbers. So we are not protecting the blockchain from the IE. We are including the IE in blockchain, but with the raw data that doesn't affect Robert or Gita or any other participant to the influence of commercial selling or let's say possibility of selling personal details or any other details from your data that can be harmful. This
But
is our idea. Yeah.
But Alexandru, I'm following your words, and what I'm very keen on is that to have it on a level of understanding that I reach many people. So and what I think I can understand what you are talking, but my fear is that if we want to have that for a broader range of people, how can we make it that simple that everybody gains trust or is developing trust in the technical mechanism which are working in the background? Because I think one really good question is we are very used to trust people or mistrust people when we see them, when we have interactions with them. But what we all not know is how is our trust built up? How is this whole thing developing with machines? Can I trust as a human machines? So has anyone thought about this question, Bart? Can you trust machines?
I think if machines would be a single entity not owned by anyone and having agency by itself, then this question would perhaps be easier to answer. But mostly, as with most platforms or machines have a specific commercial purpose or a purpose of the company that produces these machines, the purpose of these companies needs to be transparent. Like, I think the Facebook example is a very good example. If you look at what actually they want to do, is wanted to connect the whole world, but then their business model was about selling advertisements, and then they tweaked the algorithm so they stole our attention, and they designed the application in such a way that we got addicted, so they can sell more advertisements. And so even though the machine could be similar in a very commercial mode with an advertisement model, or the machine would have a different commercial purpose, the outcome of these platforms or the design will be very different. So I think it always comes back to what the purpose of these the business model is in that sense. I don't know if that answers your question, but you could, for example, if we would have humanoid robots that are serving us at home as a machine, and the robot with a business model that doesn't use your data and sell your data or creates kind of similar dependencies as with other platforms, that robot would perhaps cost 100,000 euros because you pay the full price of that product. But then suddenly Amazon comes with a humanoid robot and sells it for 20,000. But then everything you ask you want to buy is being sold through the Amazon shop. And they kind of create a business model that the robot is cheap, but they are the single channel of buying things. Most people would probably buy that 20,000 euro robot because it's just cheaper than the 100,000 where you have full agency. And I think it always comes back to these business models. And that's why I am fighting to demonetize data and demonetize insights, because you would not have in healthcare at least that kind of fight or battle that people want these information asymmetries, which at the end create these power asymmetries between the private organization and the people.
I just had, I was listening to your words and I just had the idea, maybe we come up in the future with a label with 3 steps of how ethical an AI is. So when we talk to an AI, we see, okay, this is ethic level 1, 2, or 3, and this is defining our communication with the machine.
Well, that leads to the problem that machines cannot create meaning so far, and so any ethical debate with a machine is loss of time. I think that can happen the moment we have machines that can create meaning, when we start to reference what we actually will understand under meaning. But I see there are a lot of questions here in the chat, and I think we should start to work on them, because the very idea here is to get a lively discussion with the participants and not only among the experts.
Right. So, starting with the question, is there an effort to ethically restrict the use of AI in certain areas, such as weapons technology?
I think Bart already discussed this. Yeah.
So the restrictions. So we have talked about ethically or the ethic in AI, but a restriction of AI, would that be has that come across your paths, Bart? In the
I think there is a huge race going on, and once the first country or a few countries have access to the technology, then we will perhaps set up something similar to the agency that controls nuclear power, which is based in Vienna and is kind of overseeing the development. I think we need these kind of agencies, but we need them today. And there is, even within the European Union, there was no agreement on this. And the reason partly for that is that I can share here in the chat later 2 papers. I know one is more like an article, but which kind of demonstrates that the whole ethical AI debate is being bought by big tech companies. Like 58% of the research that funds ethics in AI is being funded directly by big tech. That would be kind of similar as the tobacco industry would fund research for public health. That's kind of the situation where we are in today. Like we are having discussions, politicians are using papers, but the discussion is already bought by a certain part of the industry. So it is, we really need to have a more public discussion and debate on all these things.
Which relates to the question Rebecca asked, right? Because without a public discussion, we will have no public awareness of the problems. And as long as we do not have public awareness of the problems, no politician will react.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
There is
what we can do here is start thinking about what we can do to raise public awareness on these topics without creating this kind of panic that is always discussed when it comes to AI, right?
How can we do it? Just to get in contact with R. So if I do not know something, then I'm afraid of it. So is for me, if I book a restaurant and I'm talking to a robot, and then the reservation is placed, it's a first contact with AI.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do a Google search, you already have contact with an AI.
Yes, and many people have no fear at all when it comes to Google.
Yeah, but that's exactly my point. You don't know that you are talking or interacting with an AI. Google search is you are typing some words in, or you're talking to your phone and say, "Hey Siri, what's this and that." Yes. So it's not aware. It's what Rebecca maybe also meant. It's not aware that this is also AI. So
I think, Robert, we have to distinguish a different sort of AI. One is the sort of AI that can exploit our data. The other is the AI working in the brakes of my car.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is also something important. Most people actually do not know what artificial intelligence means and what today, at least, the limits of artificial intelligence are. Many people think tomorrow AI can become conscious. Yeah, I know, at least I know many in transhumanism were hoping about the internet becoming conscious tomorrow, which will not happen. So that is something. And I think this is a discussion that is already led, as at least in the middle class. Yeah, but when it comes to the global population, it is not. And that is a problem, because many people do not know what is happening to and with them when they are entering the internet. And that is something Alexandru and Julian have talked about. I think I have to reboot my computer here. I'm not in sync any longer. I will join you in 2 minutes.
All right.
Okay. So, what can we do to increase awareness to AI?
I can perhaps share what I'm doing with my Hippo AI Foundation as an example of how I try to change the awareness with people that it's not only about your data, it's about all of our data, because the discoveries in healthcare, as I mentioned before, are coming out of large cohorts and that are building the data relation between all of us. And that is, for me, something that creates value. And then the question is this social value or is this economical value? We kind of course, go to that direction. We want to create social value because we are open sourcing it. We are creating digital commons in that sense. And what I've started to do is that when I build up that foundation, I said, I need to work directly with patients. And so the first data set that is a large cohort that we are building on breast cancer has the name Victoria. And Victoria is a 32-year-old patient that has breast cancer. And she now works 100% in my foundation. And I mentored her for a whole year, and she's now doing her keynotes. And she calls out to say to all other women that got breast cancer or didn't have, to kind of donate to create a database. So she, as a person, she calls out and she educates, and she starts doing very emotional talks, because it's about her being connected to all other women that have breast cancer and perhaps don't have even access to the care she got. And next year, we're going to start building a patient fellowship program where we're going to multiply. That was my 1.5-year-old son who just smashed the door. So where we can multiply these Victorias, and by anthropomorphizing the data and calling it Victoria and not a database, and giving it a face and a voice and a story, we use kind of the power of narratives and storytelling to kind of bring that to the people. And we don't talk about blockchain or technology or machine learning. We talk more about purpose and about what is the value we can create together. So that's kind of my approach. And so I want 1,000 Victorias that all start building up their projects and start creating community based on that shared principle or purpose that we try to achieve.
So when I get you right, you have Victoria as an ambassador for AI for your foundation, and directly related to Rebecca's question, what can we do to power up, to support, is that we need more stories and more ambassadors for AI use.
May I ask?
Yeah.
Bart, what type of health data do you collect?
Well, for the Victoria,
for example, for the breast cancer case, I mean, what type of health data do you? I mean, there is a myriad of health data you can collect. Yeah, I'm very interested in this.
We start with a small data set with Victoria 1.0 because we want to prove a concept, and then you try to reduce complexity and try to prove more the concept. Victoria had a HER2 gene amplification kind of breast cancer, which is something you diagnose using biopsy and pathology images. And during the pathology diagnostics, you can detect that this is the kind of breast cancer. So with Victoria 1.0, we want to create a machine learning algorithm out of the database that can replicate that specific diagnosis of Victoria's diagnosis, because then the story is complete. Victoria calls for people to donate, and it's more institutions that are donating us the data. And we are able to create a high-performance machine learning algorithm, which is open source, that an African entrepreneur or a doctor can start applying for replicating their diagnosis. So everybody starts getting access to that diagnostic capacity. But we are already in discussion to extend that database to Victoria 2.0. And then we will as well include multimodal data, which is not only pathology and not only HER2 gene 2 amplifications, but it will have longitudinal data. It will have perhaps molecular data. We're not kind of so keen on that yet because we have a lot of de-identification issues with molecular data. You can't just open that up. But we're going to extend it step by step. But we, at the beginning, we start with the narrative that Victoria calls for donations, and she wants every single woman that had her problem on this planet to have the same access as she had by having access to open source AI to diagnose that cancer, because it's a treatable cancer in that sense.
Okay.
I see in the chat or in the questions here, I see two main areas building up for questions. One is related to job losses with AI, and also that we have to establish the difference between humans and machines before we address topics like job loss, as Gitta said. So, and also other question was how are we getting there that we use AI to have to work less physical and have more spare time? So maybe we direct in that in that topic. That is when is the level of AI reached that I have more spare time?
I, I want to involve Julian in this discussion because he has worked with Jacques Fresno on Venus project for many years. From my personal perspective, we cannot lead this discussion without thinking globally. At this moment, many people are starving, and the more the climate crisis becomes a problem, the more people will need work from the other countries that is now more and more directed by first world countries to machines. And I think that's an important part in discussing AI topics, to think globally here. And the other is, as I said, that we have to talk about the difference between machines and humans, which is, from my perspective, the capability of chaos management or complexity management. So that is something machines cannot do. And that is the one thing the human will in a long time will have an advantage to machines, and we can foster this advantage by creating new education systems supported by AI, where people learn to think versatile, learn to think in not only one field but in more than one. And we need to release human creativity, not only to exploit us further, but to create new environments and social architectures in which we actually then will have more spare time. It's completely idiotic to think about a world where we created tools for gardening, for example, and now we work more than ever. Yeah, we created them to work less. Yeah, so that's important. I think, Julian, this is something where you can give us some answers from the perspective of Jacques Fresno and whatever you have worked on.
Yes, first of all, I think many of the problems of the people are giving these days are not actually problems, and I don't see them real, because we're relating to something in the future. So we are somehow we stop in a place where we can see only related to our environment where we live. So we add such questions, such problems. We create such problems in a way that we don't understand the way we'll work in the future. We are in first step in realizing in the making of something, of a technology, but we already start with putting problems. We don't wait for the technology to evolve, to test it, so we can have we go back to the trust. Trust will come along the way with experience, with testing that technology. So we will evaluate in a more beneficial way. Now, talking about AIs, this is a huge step. So I don't think we could add problems to that. Maybe we will create them, as the questions are right here, but they're not quite real problems. We imagine them, but our behavior and our environment are limited to what are we now. So maybe along the way, the response to that question will be automated from the environment. So most of the questions, I can see them auto-responded on the way.
And I just think about this Kenyan project, a Danish project related to Kenya, where women in Kenya are working on safety pads, yeah, for women hygiene purposes. And the owner of the company, of the startup, she has contacts to many people in the US, etc., big corporations interested in producing them, using modern technology to do that. That is one possibility. And on the other hand is the idea of the women in Kenya creating the safety pads. Yeah, so this is a question, I think, that is related to modern technology. And I think Bart and Alexandru and you, Julian, and also we from FORMWELT, we are thinking about different approaches to helps not only with better technology, but also with fostering social programs and AI that helps with social conflicts. But what is the general tendency in AI? It's not about thinking about the poor and so on, to not taking the jobs from them, right?
Put quite some dimensions in your question there.
Yeah.
There's so many, to reduce a bit the complexity of that question and stick again to healthcare in that sense, which is my domain. In healthcare, the pie that you can share to, which are the healthcare costs that needs to be financed in that sense, cannot grow bigger. It grows perhaps bigger with the growth of the economy in itself. But I think if you look at automation, which is what AI is actually doing, and that's why we talk about job loss, because it's automating things. We need to really watch out what we want to automate. I think there's a lot of process within healthcare that don't give people a purpose in their jobs, because they're doing bureaucracy, they're doing red tape stuff, they're doing meaningless work. And I don't agree with the view that we all need more free time, because what we're going to do with our free time in that sense, a person needs purpose in to be able to feel fulfilled. But can we reduce the waste in jobs? Can we reduce the tasks that are waste? A nurse today in a hospital only spends 30% to 40% of her time on a patient. 60% is waste. And then we are talking that we don't have enough nurses in Germany, and we cannot pay them enough. And I say, well, from an economical perspective, and talk about productivity of humans, in that sense, productivity for me is time to patient.
Let me interrupt you here. Isn't that a typical first world perspective? What is waste? What is job waste? When I think from a Kenyan perspective, for example, people there would love to do what people here think is waste. So isn't there a deep conflict between modern technology and the needs of the poor on this planet?
Well, it's good that you remember that you bring in Kenya. I was in Kenya and I followed people who collected data for cancer registries. Mm-hmm. And there was one person that I followed for a few days, and he went with a book to a hospital and he looked into the paper records to find patients with specific characteristics on the disease. And within that hospital, the patient could even be in multiple records, because each floor had the records decentralized. There was not even a central record. And I asked myself, I felt from a Western perspective, I was like, oh, that poor man, he needs to go in that hospital and he needs to go and find and dig into these papers. But you are right, he was very proud of his work and he felt very fulfilled. So you make a great point there, because it reminded me exactly to that situation. Yeah. So yes, it's a Western view that I have.
Can I?
Do you know how seldom this happened, that someone says you were right?
Why?
Yeah, why?
About this problem of job losses, can I got a story, 2-minute story, which will reveal the main idea of what will happen in the future.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, all right.
I'm not a moderator here.
So, a man and a woman, they were living on this island, and they had their house on the top of the mountain. And each morning, the woman had to come down the mountain, get water, and bring it up again. And this was practically the woman's job for each day to get water. Till one day, someone or his husband find a way to add some pipeline, some sort of ingenuity thing to bring out water from the bottom of the mountain to the top. And the woman's question was, what's my job now? What should I do now that my job was to bring water. What should I do now? So nowadays, what does a woman do? Much more than that. What will a woman do, or what will a person do in the future? Much more than we'll do today. So this is a proper answer for what will be the problem of job losses. There won't be no job losses. We will just replace them with the one that we need at that time.
So what we can establish here is it's a systemic question,
Yeah,
and not
right.
a question related to AI alone.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes.
I sometimes think when we think about automation that although we can automate everything, it doesn't make sense to kill the experience of human interaction. And the best example is a 3-star Michelin restaurant versus McDonald's, where both of the experiences are very different, but it's both food. So I think I've been advocating when we open source healthcare much more in a lot of ways. People criticize me that I destroy the ability of creating economical value. And I said, like, no, let us create a competition on creating great experiences. So humans perhaps have more time for giving these experiences. And we don't spend that much time within the back end of what is everything below the experience economy. And that's a very different way of looking at it. But I think I'm also not afraid that jobs will disappear just for the fact that we have quite a lot of problems on this planet to solve.
Dominik, why don't you just read what you are writing there? Hello, your audio?
Yeah, I just found out. I have 2 buttons to click here, so just to make sure. Yeah, because I didn't want to interrupt today. I'm making so many notes here aside. But yeah, well, I differentiate between value-adding time and non-value-adding time, as I've written here. So non-value time is for me when I spend my time, for my survival, for things that for things I think where robotics, automation, AI, and so on can help us. I mean, fresh food, something to drink, a house over my head, or a roof over my head. And instead, making more time available so I can choose what I want to spend my time on, or that even you and your family and everyone can spend their time on what they want. So we don't need to fight for survival. Because what's happening right now is that we are some sort of enslaved. And that will just only be a bigger problem in the future due to climate change, for example, and when there's a lot of migration coming. So there's where I think, or where my original question that come from, what can we do so we can use these technologies to our common advantage instead of just, fixing some small things here and there.
From my perspective, we should create more tools, programs, and platforms that challenge humans and not only that deliver new ideas to help them to spare time and make life easier. But there's another thing that is going through my head since I listened again to your keynote part. And that is something, I'm sorry, Dominik, I'm slightly changing the topic, but only slightly. I find it very interesting what you just said. There's something that is going through my mind for some weeks now, but the data that is the medical data that is collected right now. Is there, when we are talking about the dangers of AI and big data, etc., is there any way this could lead to a form or sort of prototype or stereotype of medicine? Because I asked you this question, what is with all the knowledge that is not going into the data? What is with new ideas on medical approaches and stuff like that? When you're talking about data, I think it would be a good idea for you to explain to everybody listening what data actually means in this context. and how it could lead to a new form of medicine, or even to a form of medicine that leads to more stereotypes. I listened to Stavros Malas in the keynote of Pandemics and Meta Crises, and he said that today's medicine is more into the individual. Yeah, like Dominik just said, the individual, there's a perspective there, Dominik. Yeah, the individual is important. We need to explore our creativity in order to make better contributions and so on. So, did you get my question, Bart?
Well, I think so. Well, because I mentioned before that data needs a clinical context, so that means that data is always already within the context of modern medicine and is already framed within that structure. But today we talk really about, when I talk about AI, it's about replicating the best expert knowledge that we already have. So I always make this stupid remark that half of the physicians is worse than the average, which is complete nonsense, because it means that it's just a normal Gaussian distribution. And you can have an expert knowledge, where's my thing here? I can't, because my hand is blurred out. But if you have that bell curve, then you can have one outlier on the other side, which is the expert physician that will make you survive. And then on the other side, the one that takes the worst decisions. Now, for me, AI is about first using the data out of these experts and scaling that globally, so that already available expert knowledge can be applied anywhere. That is like one dimension. The other point that you made is that we can create new knowledge out of data. And I think I give an example in healthcare. I think there is in modern medicine a huge area of research which is focusing on the microbiome, which is about looking at because now we have technology that sequence the DNA of the microbes in your, and is able to do that in a very cheap way. And that's why we can start analyzing the data. But you have then an 8,000-year-old medicine in India, which is called Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is nothing else as treating your bacteria with oils on your skin, with take your nourishment and do that. So these 8,000-year-old medicine that was based on observations is now, we can now be able to, with modern technologies, can start to quantify that and start to understand it. So that perhaps answers your question a bit, that even we can apply AI to integrate other different observations and make new hypotheses, and then look if we can prove that.
Yeah, there are two examples I had in mind. One is what happened to heart disease and women. Yeah, because the data that was collected prior to some years ago was mostly collected from men. So when women had a heart attack, many doctors could not read the symptoms correctly and did not diagnose she has a heart attack. Yeah, that's one thing, and that has changed during these last 2 or 3 years, as I know. The other is in psychology. Most psychological data is collected from the middle class and from students of the middle class. So what is coming out there as models, it often do not fit for people in other classes, in other circumstances. For example, people who actually have experienced a trauma in a war zone, or as a refugee or whatever. That's what I mean.
May I comment on this?
Always.
So on this point, there is a huge problem with research, even if it's about biomedicine or about lifestyle approaches that you can take for health or anything, because people are worried about the validity of the statistics and and the confounding variables in research. And one reason why informatics are coming in front of the game, and bioinformatics and systems biology, as they call it, is because machine learning and AI analyzing big data can make better associations and lead to better decisions in healthcare, at least, which is my field. But even though I don't understand exactly what AI is and I don't know programming, I can understand the concept of organizing the chaos in data and coming with better conclusions and making better decisions. And this is something that humans we are really failing to do, which is really concerning now that technology is moving along, and we use the technology to receive even more and more and more data around every field, but we cannot analyze them objectively.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Peter,
thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah.
I wanna it's the bias in the data that is a huge issue within machine learning, the field of machine learning, and there are different dimensions. So in some areas there is no data. So and you want to train an AI that like an Asian person, for example, has a different form of anatomy of a liver, and you would train medical imaging systems that analyze the liver, but you would only train it on Western Caucasians. That system would make mistakes, and that's been in healthcare forever. Like even clinical trials have not been tested on women for certain medications, not on population averages. Some medications don't work. So yes, what you said before, I don't know if it was not you. I think it was Sarah's, that we are getting more personalized. Like the answer to that is really personalized medicine that really addresses then a more specific answer to your specific problem. So you get a much more granular view. You need more data. So this is going to be evolutionary. We are not getting there at once. The problem is that now there are AI systems on the market that are really trained on 2 data sets coming from 2 hospitals. And when Indian patients or Asian patients would come to the hospital in the US, they would get a wrong diagnosis. So the question is, where do you start? And that's something that we try to solve, because we can't solve that directly. But what we try to do with the Hippo AI Foundation is create a global community of people that then collect data within the countries. And we have the tech line, unite data, defeat inequality. So what we are doing as a foundation is getting access to these cohorts and then bringing them together and looking at the population distribution within these cohorts to make them as inclusive as possible, but with the knowledge that they always will be imperfect. But we need then to document which kind of populations we have. If you look at the mRNA, BioNTech, Pfizer clinical trials, then I don't find it enough specific on which population groups they were tested. They said like, yes, they were tested on Afro-Americans, on Asian, but not specific enough. There was not enough transparency. And I think that leads them to distrust in certain parts of the population. But I think we need to be very clear that these systems are not perfect. And we need more transparency on perhaps the ingredients. Like when you buy food, you have an ingredient list. Perhaps when you use an AI, you need to have transparency on which data it's trained on, or how the model, and that needs to be open sourced. And that's why I'm working on that field, that you need access to the data and you need access to the algorithm and the code. But the opposite is happening at the moment.
So, but what we can, I'm sorry.
I don't want to interrupt, but I want slightly raise my hand regarding a short break. So we talk for a while. So just continue, but have in mind that after an hour we had planned an break. So I would raise the idea of a break.
To me, it would be lovely if we just continue. We can close a little bit earlier then, but I think it might interrupt the livelihood of the discussion right now.
Yeah.
Because what I see here, when I have a deeper look into some possibilities how the future can be, what I see here is Bart and Dominik and Julian and Alexandru and all the others and some of us who have participated so far, that there actually is an interest in creating a world that is a little bit more personalized, more interested in the individual, in a more humane world, to give the individual more space to emancipate themselves in their own lives, right?
It's the key.
To create medicine that is more individualized, to create jobs that are more individualized and give more room for exploring yourself. I think that is something, it looks that way, that we are heading in the right direction, as Alexandru and Julian are working on blockchain technology that helps for creating websites, for example, that are completely safe and cannot be exploited any longer by AI and bots and stuff like that. Is that correct? Did I understood you? And did I understand you the right way here? Correct.
I want to make a point here. It's not just a website. It's about an entire ecosystem in which humans can create and can have in property, website, social, a network, online identity, also financial, because blockchain, it was major marketed as a financial solution, but all it's included. It doesn't matter if we move files or data as medical data, as also as a point to what Bart was telling us about medical data, which comes in big data to be filtered and so on. We are proposing a full digital identity, a full, let's say, a full medical file in which every person can upload and share its own data, like medical or like jobs, CVs, and so on. So everyone can create. Like I was telling at the beginning, I don't think in metaverse as the word. I think in a web where people, machine, i.e., can be connected to create. I don't want to use big words, but to create better solution for our future.
I think I understand. Thank you. There is an outline on your website where people can look and explore what you are doing, right? Because I see the same problem when you are talking, I have when I talk about FORMWELT Online. Most people do not understand at first what we are doing here. So best is an outline and later on a prototype to explore this. How far is your project?
We have all the components right now. The software, we have the full architecture with the full logical solution. Mm-hmm. Also, we have some components as the browser, the software that will include the browser. This is the correct way to tell about this. We have the blockchain, which is 100% functional, and it can connect our phones to all other technology. We are trying to create the mixture, because between the components that we have, also we have like distributed ledger technology as the hosting solution for all the data that everyone can upload the info to. We have the paths, and we have our own, let's say, like software mechanism and software language, which is part Go from Golang, which is part Node, and also we have the help of the OpenAI. So at this point, we are near to launch a functional beta version.
Okay. I think a good idea would be, Alexandro and Julian, because this is your project, and you should present it. I think a good idea would be for us to connect later for a personal presentation we can publish on FORMWELT and on Larnaca-Conferences. I think about something interactive. We can talk about that, so people can see what you are doing by learning what you are doing. Because when you talk about it, I have the problem. I cannot follow to every point. It's just something you say. And I know this problem from my own field. So I think it would be a good idea, Julian and Alexandro, that we meet in December or January and make a presentation, a live presentation of what you are doing. On your website, and surf through what you're doing and so on.
Just a little point I want to talk about. We are, let's say, like pro bono for all the participants, and also we really want to support FORMWELT Bart if he is taking time to take a look, and all other industries pro bono, because we are trying to learn people before having any financial gains, and this is all on my side.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah.
But so far and for now, let's connect the dots. Okay. So, but medical data is now also collected in a more diverse way, right? People are working on this and thinking about this. I think that's an important part. And so I think now we should, Robert, have a look at the questions and what is with Cadell, what he has to bring in, and see what we have overlooked and come to an end. In round about half an hour or something like that.
So what we didn't touch so far was questions regarding education and children learning to code. What's AI, or what is algorithms mining our data supporting that? And maybe Cadell has also some thoughts or ideas which we have left out.
When it comes to education, I would recommend to read the article on education and self-education with the support of FORMWELT and FORMWELT Online. That is something that's going on there. And then I know that, but of course all of you know that there are more and growing online projects to support children, especially now in lockdown situations. And for example, in other countries who have no good education systems, online support is delivered from America. For example, I know to Kenya, and stuff like that is going on there right now. Is there anyone here who knows more about that?
or has something to say about it. So
I have shared here a link of, it's just an example. There is this global network, and this is one that is in Heilbronn, which is called 42, and it's a really global network that is building up schools in a very different way as university would set up an education to learn people to code in very fast programs. So they are now thinking there are 42 schools. It was originally originated from Paris, and they train, and this is really scaling really fast. They are training people. I don't know if it's only focused on young people, if there's an age limit, but I see more and more of these initiatives where it is not embedded within the academical curriculum, but is really getting more in a different, perhaps more modern way to learn.
Yeah.
I'm a bit afraid. I've been advocating since a while that, for example, medical professionals in all ways should at least get a basic digital literacy so they can understand code. They don't have to be the best coders, understand machine learning. But in Germany, we just had the new coalition vertrag, like contract, and there was a point mentioned that they are going to change the curriculum for medical studies, but their focus is they want to include gender studies in there. There was nothing written there on digital literacy, on policy. So it was more about the specific ideologies in the curriculum as that, and that really frustrated me because it's so important. In China, every child gets to learn at basic school, at high school. Die Grundschule is that high school in English?
No, it's
elementary
school. Yes.
Elementary school.
They learn how to code in elementary school. They learn fighting in high school. Machine learning is part of the normal curriculum. Everybody learns it like you would learn your national language. In England, they're starting to do that as well. And I think we're having the wrong focus here. We need that is like writing and reading in a sense. And it comes back a bit to what Alvin Toffler said in one of his books, that the analphabets of the future will not be the one that can not read and not write, but the ones who cannot learn and unlearn and relearn. And I think that is really important, that we need to be faster in adopting learning systems.
We are trying to help there with FORMWELT, and since FORMWELT is a coding language that helps not only children but also adults and the elderly to at least comprehend how algorithms are function, but they are using this in their ordinary language, so the barrier is a little bit more low than to enter into coding directly.
Can people who, forgive my ignorance, but can people who are not mathematical brains learn coding and programming and understand algorithms and work with it?
In FORMWELT? Or
no, I mean generally.
My experience, I have worked with people who have no higher education, and they were far more capable to learn this than many people with a higher education, because they have not so much to unlearn. But what's your experience?
I've look. This is, you don't have to be, when you start to read and write, you don't have to become Shakespeare. I think there are different levels in here, and I think I lectured. I stopped lecturing because I spent more time on my foundation. But when I lectured, my main goal was to make them curious, and I think curiosity is that what drives people to learn themselves. And I think if you can achieve that, that is more important. And how far people come, that will depend on what goals they want to achieve. But I like, and you need to be like, people are afraid. Like you, I was told that when I finished high school that I should not study computer sciences by a counselor. And look where I am now. It doesn't make any sense. So I think taking the fears away of people. So like what you do as a child, you want to touch, you're curious, and then people start to forbid that you should not be able to touch it. But I think in knowledge gathering and learning and education, we should try to create people that are open and curious and give them the opportunities to be curious and explore in that sense. And I think that is so important, but our education systems are kind of set up in a different way still.
Yep.
Don't teach the people how to build a boat. Tell them about the far land. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So are there questions we have missed?
I was in the background putting the questions together, and I see no field what we have left untouched. So we talked about that. So that would be
time for Cadell, right?
Yes.
Are you with us, Cadell?
Cadell, are you there?
Hello.
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 I've been enjoying listening to your conversation. I have a few comments I could share.
Mm-hmm.
The first one being is really appreciating the distinction that Dominik brought up between value-added time and non-value-added time. The reason why that's so present in my mind right now is just because I was involved in a conversation about exchange value at the ground of the commons. And thinking about exchange value at the ground of the commons. So if we're thinking about the future of technology and specifically value, I think embedding it in a different political framework is necessary. Not sure if I have any other super deep wisdoms to offer, other than that I did really appreciate Bart's keynote, and specifically what stood out to me was this emphasis on commons and digital objects and the problems of commons and digital objects, and creating sort of a way to overcome hurdles of collaboration because of basically exploitation and capitalization and really what I'm going to try and emphasize here is just the politics of all this technology. And ultimately, I don't know how to frame it, other than that it seems to be a problem of authority and legitimization on some level, because we have international companies, international corporations with advanced technology, and there's no international body that can sort of function as nation states functioned in the 20th century, let's say. That's how I sort of try to think about it. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything else to respond to that, but that's sort of how I try to think about it.
I can so relate to that. We had a lot of contact to the United Nations during these last 2 years. And every time I talked to someone from the United Nations, they told me they can do nothing.
There's an impotence.
Yeah.
It's a paradox of the global state. I think even this paradox of the paradox of the global state has come up in a lot of literature. The most dominant literature that I at least I'm aware of was Thomas Piketty's Capitalism in the 21st Century. I think this paradox of the global state came up, but it's like it's an authority and legitimization crisis. That's how I think about it, because there's no one entity, and everyone, if it does concentrate in one entity, it will be seen as a totalitarian effort.
Yeah, the United Nations are not constructed for change. They are constructed to secure the status quo. Yeah.
Sorry.
Chandela, you said like that there is no global nations, but what we see is that we start to see global tribes, and tribalism is a big aspect in these online communities. You have the anti-vaxxer tribes, for example, at the moment, which are united in that sense. And I think that's what I wanted to do with Hippo AI, to understand how I can create movement over time, is really be very strong with our values and our purpose. And then we're building up these patients that then will create community, and we will also create our tribe.
Do you have a scapegoat?
A scapegoat?
Yeah, you need a scapegoat. The anti-vaxxers have a scapegoat, so they'll work. See that, but that's the problem with human motivation and human value systems is that it requires some sort of imaginary external enemy, it seems, to coalesce, like the anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, but that's how Germany unified was the Prussians united with the Bavarians, and I think because France was the enemy.
Exactly. Where's your enemy?
Well, that's kind. I think we all will. I think Russia, China, and the US will unite when Death Star is threatening to destroy the world.
Yeah, we need the aliens to come, then we'll unite.
Yeah, but that's what I try to get movement in my Hippo AI Foundation. My enemy is the privatization of all life-saving knowledge by a single company, and that's kind of the enemy image that we create, because everybody understand if that happens, then we are all FUK, CUK, but
FUCK, we're all
FUCK. We are all doomed in that sense, and we will see a lot of inequality because markets will never regulate solidarity in healthcare. That's what.
So are we back to Marx?
That's really a painful question for me, because if you look at what Marxism did in terms of putting it into practice in history, it is not a successful model either. So because then there is the abuse of power, of the authority, coming back to your thing.
I know.
Question of authority.
Exactly.
Always abuse of power. I had a really interesting conversation with the digital minister of Taiwan, and I like really what they are doing in Taiwan. They are building up a purely participatory driven digital democracy, and they have their enemy is of course China, and China tries to influence the population online by creating fake news and doing this. So the government in Taiwan needs a lot of trust. And they know that their enemy is using these online tribes and sharing information. So the answer from Taiwan is really creating radical transparency and participatory cultures. And they are even publishing budgets online, and the people can start discussing about the use of budgets. They are the interview that I had with Audrey Tang, which is the digital minister. You can only interview it if you put a transcript or a video under a Creative Commons license online. So everything what they are doing is starting to create really radical openness, radical transparency. And that's, I think, a model for the governments of the future.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I signed that one.
Germany, we are very far away.
Yeah.
It's also a fact that people are disappointed by how life works, and this is a very big reason why people get these extreme sites, and they don't trust what's coming or what's happening or what's going to happen to them, and they become anti-vaxxers or anything like that. I mean, no one gave them the opportunity to really trust the authorities.
I think what we should take into consideration here is becoming an anti-vaxxer is first a step forward and not a step back. We are talking about people here who are actually trying to address a higher level of complexity.
Yes.
Yes, but in the end, this leads to a lower level of complexity in the public discussion. But it is an attempt to create more individuality and to create a broader space where other opinions are valued. Yeah.
Yes. Did you know that all these anti-vaxxers movement started from a scientist who was manipulating his data, published like wrong, completely false data that vaccines are correlated with autism or that they cause autism? Yeah. No, he took his license, the paper was retracted, and
no, but I'm a fan of Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary's work in the last century on guerrilla ontology. And an approach to, you love it, Cadell, right? An approach to...
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. No,
conspiracy theory as an creative attack on your own mind.
Yeah, so it seems that we addressed all the broader topics. And if there are any questions or comments on this panel tonight?
We haven't heard anything from Joanna and from Christine. So if you guys would like to add something, or Patrick, if you wish to say something, we would love to hear it.
That was really a lot. I think what I will take with me is the example from Taiwan, because I was reflecting about how can we use information technology together with artificial intelligence to create systems that free us and let us collaborate on a different level. So that I didn't know that about Taiwan, so that's for sure something I will take with me and try to integrate it in my work and research. Thank you. And thanks everybody for contributing. It was really fascinating. I couldn't follow everything because so many topics, but it was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, for me today it was more about listening, because it's not exactly my area of topic or professional work. But as I'm organizing these conferences, I'm always there. And I left out my camera today because of an eye inflammation. So I'm sorry not to contribute this evening.
Thank you, Christine. And
for being here.
Yeah, and all the best for your eyes. Bart and Julian and Alexandro and Cadell, I think it would be a good idea if you could share links you find interesting in context of our discussion with me at contact@formwelt.net, so we can make a list of everything interesting in the leading article that brings together all information about this conference and the breakout session and the panelists and so on. Yeah, I think that would be something supportive, especially, Bart, if you have something on Taiwan.
I can with self-promotion, but I have a YouTube video with a 1-hour interview with Audrey Tang.
Even better.
So because I discussed with her if AI should be able to allow to create patents, which was my biggest fear, in that sense that one single company just creates all the potential cures for all diseases at once, patents that as a scenario. But we touched upon very different things. I can share that, but I can share as well a few articles that she explains more what she's doing. I think it's fascinating. She's the opposite of the digital minister in Germany, because she's always posting on Instagram to get more famous. And Audrey Tang from Taiwan doesn't even have a smartphone, because she says like she doesn't want to get hacked by algorithms. so
can relate to that.
She's a really smart person, and she has a hacker background. She's a coder, a hacker. But it's fascinating because they have that situation with China that is really a big threat, uses the online world to influence the mindset of the population, and they are trying to finance us to fight it. And I think that is a perfect best practice for all of us, because we have that too. Russian probably bots are influencing our discussions to destabilize Europe. There are kind of a lot of these things happening on all sort of levels. And I think if that answer is transparency and participatory and radical openness, then this is a positive way to look at the future.
Yes, thank you. And to all of you, if you have articles you want to see published in context of these conferences, please send them to us, even throughout the year, because the Larnaca-Conferences are not something that is happening once in November, but they are an ongoing project with many practical projects coming out of them. Yeah, and if you like, please stay in contact. Yeah, feel free to contact each other. We will bring you in contact if you are okay with this, and your email addresses.
Yes.
Yeah, if not, please say it now. So you can talk to all the other panelists and people who were participating. When you have something, you add them to your newsletters and so on. And Julian and Alexandro and Bart, I think we should meet again to explore a little bit more what Julian and Alexandro are doing here, because I think these conferences weren't the best place to talk about this, because we need something to see. What you are doing. Yeah. So I think you came a little bit short here with your intentions. I know the feeling. For 7 years now, I try to present FORMWELT online. Finally, I have people to support it, but I know how you can talk and talk and talk and talk, and everybody's saying, what? Okay.
Yeah.
Robert?
Yeah, so also from my side as a facilitator in this breakout sessions, I want to thank you all the participants for the contributions and the comments and the thoughts you shared. Really interesting. We have looked and put light on a very broad range of topics, and also some of you maybe are experiencing that the connections between that, like Gita said, to connecting the dots is sometimes demanding a high effort. But I think we have done good, and this is to be continued. And so at the last thing, I would say to all of you, stay healthy, and thank you for the contribution, and thank you for being here. Thank you for being the guests.